Alright, so let's start. We're talking about the pre-game stuff first. So these are events that happened in the game before the start of the game, before you create your character. So there are a myriad of historical events that have happened in Lost Ark, and they kind of set the foundation and the precedence for the current events and your journey in the game as the Seeker. So we can go all the way back, pretty much. We can talk about what is essentially the creation of the universe, because this is a game whose fantasy archetypes are operated by the existence of gods and these divine beings. And so there were two gods that really started this whole ordeal. There was Regulus, which one of your servers is named after, as well as Igarum. Regulus, he's considered the god of order. He creates things, and he creates the universe, and the universe itself is called Omnium, which is where we get the whole term, the Omnium stars, and the whole celestial constellations and whatnot. They refer to the universe. And so he created the Omnium stars, and he creates the laws for everything that exists in the beginning. And at the core of the universe, he creates the Primal Arc, which is what the game is more or less named after, the Arc. And so this Primordial Arc, it's kind of the source of light in the world, a light that could never be extinguished. But everything else that he created was finite. It would be created and eventually it would die. The one exception was the Ark itself, and the Ark was a light that could never ever go out. While he did create this, he did also technically create death as well, because death, the concept of death, did not exist prior to all of this. So Igarum, he's the other god. He's the god of chaos. If Regulus is the god of order, then Igarum, he is the god of chaos, and he reigned over the world of darkness, which we would later know to be called Petrania. And he was very envious of Regulus's creation. He also wanted the Ark for himself, but he could not create the Ark. And the best he could come up with was something called the Red Moon. But the problem with the Red Moon was, unlike the Ark, the Red Moon would eventually expire. It would eventually die. And he figured that if he had the Ark, then he would have a power, that he would possess a power that would serve as a catalyst for chaos. But in any case, we have the setup for the two gods now, Regulus, who creates, and then Igarum, who wants everything to be disorderly and chaotic. And among one of the many stars that Regulus had created, he created one called Arkesia. And Arkesia was one of the very few stars that could actually house life. And so, as far as terminology goes, Arkesia would later be known as this game's Middle Earth. So now, to set up the universe a little bit, we have the stars, we have Arkesia, and then we have Petrania. And Petrania is the world of chaos that was created by Igarum as a counterpart to Arkesia. So that's where you guys are. You guys are in Arkesia. You guys are chilling, hanging out there. Then, somewhere off in a planet nearby, there's a very desolate place called Petrania. In any case, because these two worlds were essentially counterparts with each other, they sort of resonated, especially since they were created by each one's respective god. So Regulus, he obviously couldn't really just watch over Arkesia constantly on his own, so he created 7 minor gods to kind of rule over Arkesia and to create a respective race for each of them. So we had the god of harmony, Gienna, who created the seas, and that's where you end up with the Gienna Sea, and also Gienna coins and all those things associated with Gienah. Everything related to the water is essentially Gienah, especially onto the Eastern Sea. Each of the 7 gods, they created a race. So there were 7 primordial races, 3 major races that were a bit more powerful than the rest of the races. And then there were the 4 other races as well. And these were the 7 original races of Arkesia. And they kind of grew and rapidly developed and became, you know, somewhat prideful and maybe somewhat dismissive to their creators as well. Oh, that's right. I completely forgot that Igaram has a different name. His name is Zosma. So let's talk about the races and their respective gods. There was Procyon, also known as the god of honor, and he created the Lazineth. Procyon, you also know it as the Procyon Sea to the west, so half the world is the Gienah Sea, and the other one is the Procyon Sea, and you also know it by Procyon's compass, which tells you about the day's events as well. So the god of honor, Procyon, he created the Lazineth, and originally the Lazineth were all a winged race, and they also had the power of flight, and they most closely resembled Regulus himself. There was Crater, known as the god of wisdom, who created the Sylvain, which is the magical race that you guys know that inhabit Rohendel. Antares, the god of fire, he created the Howl, and they were super proficient in the ways of fighting and combat. They were the greatest warriors of the 7 original races. There was Aldebaran, the god of life, and he created the spirits of nature, and they would just, you know, be roaming around the world and whatnot. Whenever you see spirits, those were created by Aldebaran. There was Arctur, the god of earth, who created both the giants and the Umar. So the dwarven race in Yorn, those were all created by Arctur, which is where you get Arctur's blessing, which was one of the vital materials that was needed to upgrade your weapons and armors. So those are the smiths and the rugged folks of Yorn. There was Sirius, the god of ice, who created the Tauber, and this is a race that we haven't been introduced yet, but they're a race that survived in the frozen tundra. Gienah herself created 2 races, the Yozis and the Pasita tribe. The Pasita, they're a tribal race that live within the sea, and the Yoz, they reside, if you press M and you're in game right now and you go to the bottom right and you look for North Remeria and South Remeria, that's where the Yozes come from. We haven't gone there yet, but there is a class that comes from down there, and that is the specialist class. So those small people, those are the Yozes. They come from North and South Remeria. And they have a special power. They have the ability to communicate with all forms of life, animals, and whatnot in the world. Lastly, Gienah, who had created the Pasita, as well as the Yoz, and Sirius, they worked to create the last race on the Earth, which were the humans. That's you. And the humans were special because even though they didn't have any special traits, they were completely mediocre in every way, which shape, and form compared to the other races, they had the ability to adapt and grow, arguably faster than any other race. The 7 gods afterwards, after they created the 7 races, would then leave Arkesia to their own world where they can kind of observe the world from there. They just kind of left. So, as I mentioned before, among the 7 races, there were 3 in particular that were just a bit more gifted than the rest. They were the Lazineth, the Howl, and the Sylvain. So, the winged race, the race that was really good at fighting, and the magic race. The Lazineth, they were the only race that could fly, which was a great power, and they were given the task to observe and kind of govern the world with their flight. And while the Howl were excellent at being resourceful and strong and fighting, The Sylvain, they were the wisest race and the most adept at handling magic. And so with those three races kind of in balance and kind of checking one another so that none would grow too strong, all the other races were able to develop together as well. But unfortunately, at some point, something bad happened. Of course, right? Peace couldn't be there forever. So the Hal, in their effort to seek power, they tricked their own god, Antares, and they stole his fragment of the Ark. At this point in time, Regulus had taken the Primal Arc and split it into 7 pieces, which he had given to each of the minor gods that were ruling the world. The Hal had tricked Antares into taking his piece of the Ark, and they were planning on using that Ark to kind of rule over the world. The Sylvain and the Lazineth, they joined forces to try and stop the Hal, but empowered by the Ark, they couldn't stop the Hal. So before they were completely wiped out, the people of the Lazineth, they did something very desperate, which this is very important to note because I'm fairly sure as a speculative person that this is a detail that's going to come up in this upcoming month. The Lazineth, they infiltrated the god's realm and stole Procyon's Ark to be on even footing with the Hal. And with that, they were able to suppress the Hal completely. Ultimately, the ends, they don't really justify the means. And what they did was essentially betray the gods that had created them. And this really pissed off Regulus. First of all, Antares, who was completely careless, was expelled from the domain of the gods for being tricked into giving his Ark to the Hal. Procyon also failed to protect their piece of the Ark and was stripped of language, the ability to speak, and forced into eternal silence. The Hal, the people who started this whole mess and really messed things up, they were completely wiped out by Regulus. He just killed all of them. They're all dead. They're completely extinct for having stolen the Ark and deceiving their god. Lastly, there's the case of the Lazineth, the people who stole Procyon's compass. And even though they are the race that is Regulus's favorites, and so he couldn't let them go unpunished, but at the same time, they definitely received a lighter sentence than with the Hal. So all of the Lazineth had their wings crippled, and they lost the ability to fly, except for one. One Lazineth got to keep their wings, and they made it so that once every 1,000 years, one person born from the Lazineth would be sentenced to Trixion to oversee the fate of the world, and that one Lazineth would have kept their wings. But of course, they are locked away in Trixion, where even though they have the power of flight, they cannot use it. Yes, that does mean that Beatrice is many hundreds of years old. In the end, after this first war that had broken out, where the result of this war is, 1, the Hal, they're extinct now, or at least as far as we know, and 2, the Lazineth, they had their wings crippled, and they would actually also be sent to Elgacia, but not all of them, just some of them. It's their homeland. After the war, Regulus, he didn't want the gods to be involved at all with the mortal affairs of the world, and the power of the Ark, which had pretty much caused this whole problem, kind of dissolved from memory, and people mostly forgot about it. Elgacia is the homeland of the Lazineth. The demon continent is Petrania. So, among all these things that had happened, obviously there was a lot of bloodshed, many people died, and overall, Arkesia was kind of thrust into a state of chaos for a little bit. And with the power of the Ark amplified by the war between the great races, the balance of power between Arkesia and Petrania, the world of chaos, kind of became distorted, and there was a dimensional crack that we know in game as Chaos Gates. Chaos Gates are those portals that open up, and we go into them. And when we go into them, we're technically in Petrania, and we're, staving off demonic forces before they can spill out. It's like if you've ever read a manual where there's like a dungeon break or something like that, and the adventurers have to go in and take care of it before something catastrophic can happen. Yeah, kind of like Oblivion Gates. Same energy. Zosma, who I had previously referred to as Igarum. Again, this guy is obsessed with obtaining the power of the Primal Arc, and he didn't want to miss this opportunity. Because this kind of gate appeared between Petrania and Arkesia, he kind of took this chance and took his entire demonic forces, and they kind of just waltzed right into Arkesia. And he had his own leaders at this time, and they don't have a name, so they're just known as the ones who existed from the beginning. It's kind of wordy, but we won't be referring to them that often, but just consider them his leaders. And so the gods, they decided to intervene in the world crisis, and they wanted to work together with the races of Arkesia to fend off Zosma and his generals. But unfortunately, when their powers kind of collided between the gods, the races, and the demons, there was kind of this worldly imbalance, and Arkesia was starting to try to pull Petrania through the dimensional fissure, which could have been catastrophic. It would have been like two worlds colliding, pretty much. And the first person to kind of realize that this could be an issue was actually Zosma, the god of chaos. He was like, oh, looks like I did an oopsie. And he actually ends up reaching out to Regulus, and he's like, we kind of had to stop this from happening, or else, everything will be destroyed. Yeah, my bad, sorry, basically. And so Regulus and Zosma, Regulus takes the power of the arcs, his minor gods bring the arc to him, and then the two of them work together, and they create a new species called the Guardians. And these Guardians are the ones that you are killing every day. The Guardian raids. Yeah. So, Guardians like Virtus and Chromanium and Helgaia and all those guys. So the two of them work together and they create the Guardians, and the Guardians are able to kind of stabilize the dimensional fissure and keep the two worlds from colliding, more or less. What's very important to know about the Guardians, though, is that they're beings created of both light and darkness by both Zosma as well as Regulus. So there are such things as Guardians of Light, and then there are such things as Guardians of Darkness. So the very first Guardian that was created, his name was Vergris. And if you look to the bottom of your world map, there is a place called Vergris's Nest, which is defended by two really, really strong Guardians. So Vergris, he is one of the few Guardians that actually possess a conscience and the ability to think, and he kind of leads over the rest of the Guardians as well. Once they would eventually, put this matter to rest, the Guardians themselves would go into slumber. So they kind of were created, they did their job, and then they went to sleep. You see the big dragon we see in the trailers? Yes, that is the same one. After the whole incident, Zosma was like, okay, my bad. And then he took his forces and they went back to Petrania because they were worried that if they kind of repeated what they did, the same thing would happen where the entire universe would be potentially at risk of blowing up. So, after all this, so again, let's recap. The Hal are dead. The Lazineth, they can't fly anymore, and they've retreated to Elgacia. The Guardians were created, but they've gone back to sleep because they did their job of making sure that Arkesia didn't die. For a while, things were pretty good in Arkesia. Things were peaceful and everyone kind of prospered and they were technologically advancing. Unfortunately, though, the same could not be said for Patrania, the world of chaos that Zosma led. They failed their invasion of Arkesia. And for the most part, most of the creatures in Patrania, they kind of grew and evolved in their own way into different forms and grotesque beings. And they would just attack each other for survival, and everything would. It was just it was like PUBG, the Patrania edition. They were just killing each other. It was a battle royale every day. But there was one demon, a singular demon, that kind of rose up from the rest of them, and he would be considered the Lord of the Abyss. And he would establish order among all of this chaos within the world, and he was known as Kazaros. Kazaros, he established his own demons, and he considered him, well, he established himself as a major player in Patrania. But there was a problem. Kazaros' methodology of gaining power was to create order in what was otherwise a world of chaos. And so Zosma, realizing what was going on, he went to confront Kazaros, and he was like, he was going to just kill Kazaros and be done with it. But when he arrived there, he was met by the ones who existed from the beginning, his own generals, who had turned coat and joined Kazaros' side. And the two forces together managed to defeat Zosma, who had been weakened by the order that was establishing in his world. So this is a guy who is basically strong, and he fed off the power of chaos, but when there was less chaos, because of Kazaros, he was weakened enough where his own people betrayed him, and he was defeated. However, when he was defeated, his body was destroyed, but his soul flung off into two shards. One landed at the foot of a place in Patrania called the Black Rock Mountains, and then the other one fell into the depths of the original chaos. Kazaros, he was content with his victory. He didn't even notice that shards of Zosma managed to survive. So after the death of Zosma, Kazaros, he rules over the world of chaos along with the former generals of Zosma. He expelled the particularly grotesque creatures. He's a very judgy guy. He's like, no, you don't fit as a demon. Get out of here. He would just get rid of them. And then he pretty much just made the demons that he created the ones that would rule over Patrania moving forward. Kazaros appoints the former generals of Zosma as the new gods of darkness, and they kind of create their own civilization on Patrania. So Patrania, formerly a wilderness, Kazaros is looking over Arkesia and is like, hey, they seem to be doing pretty well. Can we just do what they're doing, but over here? And then, they're starting to prosper now and create their own civilization. His gods of darkness, the former generals from Zosma, they use their power and they create what is called the Red Moon. And the Red Moon, which you might have seen in game a few times, maybe in the backdrop a few times here and there, the Red Moon was supposed to mimic the sun or the Primal Arc. But the problem with the Red Moon is that unlike the sun, which was created from the Primal Arc and would never extinguish, the Red Moon actually has an expiration date. Eventually it would wane and then the light would go out completely from it. Kazaros, he was born from the depths of darkness. He didn't actually like the Abyss all that much. And his ultimate goal was to unite Arkesia with Patrania. So remember that whole bit where the two worlds were going to collide? Unlike Zosma, who was like, oh no, this is probably bad. Kazaros is like, wait, this doesn't sound like a bad idea. This sounds pretty good. I like the sound of this. Unfortunately, he had no clue on how to actually unite them, is the thing. So one day, once all the chaotic beings were extinguished from Patrania, all the demons that he felt were unfit to be demons that he would rule over, because he basically eradicated all of them. There was one last demon from the original batch of demons, and he appeared before Kazaros, and before disappearing, he left a prophecy that said, when the light of the red moon dies, the dimension will become distorted. And this basically was saying that when their red moon in Petrania was waning and about to completely die out, that would be the time where he could unite the two worlds together, or he could invade the two worlds together. And so now Kazaros is like, first of all, I don't even know why Kazaros believed this demon. He just heard this and he was like, well, that sounds plausible enough to be real. So that's lore for you, I guess. And now he's just kind of idly waiting by for the light of the red moon, which his own gods created. Well, it'd be weird if they didn't make that. Then I guess this prophecy would have never happened. And now he waits for this red moon to extinguish, and then that will be his time to strike. Ultimately, it turns out that Kazaros, much like Zosma, he's also obsessed with the Primal Arc. Everyone likes the Arc in Lost Ark. Go figure. And everyone wants it for themselves. So Kazaros, he just observes over a long period of time the different races that were born from chaos. And he ruled Petrania by appointing prominent beings as his Legion commanders. And the first thing that Kazaros creates is the Phantom Legion, and he appoints the cold and cruel Belshazzar, Petrania's most powerful sorceress, as their commander. She has a +8 Legion commander weapon, so she's really strong. The seat of the Plague Legion was given to Akan, and he's like this sick, ghastly demon who just goes around and then he touches other demons and then they die and he absorbs them. And he just absorbs the flesh and blood from other demons. And so he possesses the power to corrupt everything. And he's known as the Lord of Corruption. Somewhere in the center of Petrania, there's a fierce battle. Like the battle royale is still going on, and there's these beasts that are just fighting each other constantly. But there's one beast that is greater than the rest, that kind of looms over the rest of them. Giant built, bullish demon, and his name is Volton. And he just completely rules over the rest of them at this point. And his power is said to be able to lift even the Black Rock Mountains themselves, which I don't know what the Black Rock Mountains are. I'm just guessing they're a really nice rock formation in Petrania. So I guess it's a big deal that he can lift them up. Kazaros gives him even more power and appoints him as the Demon Beast Commander. Next, there is... this one might be kind of weird. There is Echidna, who reigns as the Queen of Dreams. I don't know what Echidna looks like, so just assume that she looks like Echidna from ReZero. Or Knuckles. Either one. Whichever evokes imagery the best for you. Echidna, she reigns as the Queen of Dreams, and she was appointed as the commander of the Covetous Legion, the Lord of Desires who steals the hearts of demons by giving them what they want. But Echidna, despite being one of the appointed Legion commanders, she wasn't happy with her position, and the reason why? She was jealous, because Belshazzar was considered the right-hand woman of Kazaros. She was the second in command, and Echidna thought that she deserved that position. So she sends her minion Vicus to form a wedge between Belshazzar and Kazaros, but Vicus is like, hey Belshazzar. Hey, that hoe Echidna, she's trying to get rid of you. And then Belshazzar is like, oh, so that's what she's trying to do. So then they conspire, the two of them, and they kill Echidna. And then Belshazzar is like, oh, Kazaros, I know we have an empty seat. There's this one demon named Vicus who would be perfect for that seat in the Legion Commanders. And so that is how Vicus becomes the Legion Commander of the Covetous Legion. Ironically, though, despite working together with Belshazzar, Vicus would also end up quite unhappy with her position and much like Echidna, becomes quite envious that she is not in a higher position like Belshazzar as well. So the next Legion General is Kekul Sedon. And Kekul Sedon, first of all, the first thing that you need to know about Kekul Sedon is not his name. There's Kekul, and then there's Sedon, and they're two different beings. Kekul is the little doll that sits on his shoulder, and Sedon is the clown that you see himself. Yeah, it's basically like Kate Sith. It's the same idea. So Kekul Sedon, he's not prominent in the demon world at all. He's not special in any way whatsoever. But one day he kind of just walks up to Kazaros and he's like, hey, make me a Legion commander. And at first, Kazaros says no, so he leaves. And the next day he comes back and he's like, how about today? Can I be a Legion commander today? And this goes on for a little while. And then every day he would come back and he would just kind of chatter with Kazaros, even though Kazaros isn't listening, and just kind of annoy him over and over until eventually Kazaros just yields and gives him a Legion General position. And Kekul Sedon, he's not special anyway, but he is a smart general. And what he does is he takes all the small demons in Petrania that can't join any of the other Legion generals, and he amasses them into one super army of the Madness army. And his army by far was the largest, and what they didn't have in quality, they made up in quantity. So finally, we have the last Legion commander, the Dark Sword of Famine. So Petrania, it's a whole world, right? And while Kazaros controlled half of the world, there was another half of the world that was kind of in darkness. I guess if we're getting technical, the sun would shine on one side but not the other. And on this other side, there was one dark swordsman who single-handedly dominated the entire half of Petrania on his own. And the gods of darkness who worked underneath Kazaros, they were very concerned about this. They were worried about this, and they warned Kazaros of Famine. Kazaros, he kind of observes Famine for a little bit, and he becomes super fascinated with his strength. And one day he approaches Famine, and he's like, "You want to work underneath me and be a Legion commander?" And Famine, with his arms crossed, looks at him, and he just responds with, and then he becomes the 6th Legion commander. Famine forms a small elite task force. So unlike Kekul Sedon, who has this expansive army, Famine just has he has the smallest army, but each one of his soldiers, I guess, are among some of the strongest in Petrania. So with the addition of Famine, all 6 of the Legion commanders and their armies have been established, and Kazaros, because he took forever to put them all together, now saw that his time was coming and the red moon was beginning to wane, and its light was coming close to extinguishing. So, we talked about Petrania and everything that was going on over in Petrania, how Zosma was betrayed and killed, or was he? And Kazaros has rose to power with his 6 Legion generals and established order within Petrania, and now they're waiting for their opportunity to strike. So let's circle back over to Arkesia now during this time. So remember, after the original events where everything was going to shit and they had to make the Guardians to stop the worlds from colliding, after that, the gods were like, I don't want any of this. I'm leaving. So the 7 gods, they're gone from the world now. They've all left at this point. So each of the races, they've been developing at their own accord. The most prosperous race of the humans, they served Regulus. They were very they were very faithful to their god. And this order within the human race would be known as Sacria, and they would establish themselves as God's representatives, so to speak. They felt like it was in their mission to serve their god, and they were very, 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 very adamant in making sure that their agenda was always met. So they had power and influence over all the other civilizations in all the continents. And the priests of Sacria, who would form religion and would cause conflict with other regions, go figure, became curious of the divine power of the Ark, which had disappeared. This is something that people had forgotten about. But I guess there were records of this somewhere, and they began to remember what the Ark was. Keep in mind, this is over the time span of hundreds of years where people can forget about these things. And they figured that if they were able to find the Ark, that they could prove that their god was very real and that their faith was very real as well. And so Archbishop Thermer II of Sacria, the leader of this sect, he kind of kept it in secrecy within the temple that the Ark existed, and he would regularly dispatch out Paladins of Sacria to just investigate and look for the Ark. Paladins in the exact same sense that you guys think the class Paladins that you can pick and create. So Paladins, they were created as a new class in Lost Ark, and they're based off of the religious sect of Sacria. So the Paladins and the secret organization of the Dawn Priests, they were the sword of Sacria's nation. And on the surface, while it seemed like Paladins were the main force of Sacria, in reality, everyone laughs at DPS Paladins, so the real threat was probably the Dawn Priests, who were more powerful and fewer in number. Up until his death, though, Thermer II, he wasn't really able to unearth any clues regarding the Ark, but his successor, Thermer III, would pick up his legacy and send out countless Paladins to their deaths in pursuit of finding the piece of the Ark. He obsessed over the Ark far more than his late father, and he would eventually come to discover that the pieces of the Ark were hidden on 6 of the other continents. And so, in the name of God, Thermer III convinced the king of the Rethramis Federation and the leader of Shushire to hand over their pieces of the Ark. In addition, he found another piece of the Ark hidden in the submerged city of Posita, one of the original races which served Regulus. And then the remaining 3 pieces of the Ark were located in the Queen's Garden in Rohendel, at the top of Mount Antares in Curzon. If you don't know where Curzon is, if you open up your map right now and go over to Arthetine, look a little bit to the right, and that's where Curzon is. And within the body of a great giant by the name of Domek. Thermer III, blinded and basically deranged by his ambition of gathering all the pieces of the Ark, ordered his army to surround Domek and murder him in cold blood and carve out the Ark from his body. And then he sacrificed countless lives of Paladins to the top of Mount Antares, which is a very hostile land of death and decay, and they retrieved the Ark at the top of there as well. After retrieving the Ark from Mount Antares, the volcano basically erupted, because I guess it was the only thing keeping the volcano stable, and literally melted away all the citizens of Curzon that were living near there. They just kind of evaporated in lava. And since then, Curzon has become pretty much a completely desolate land of curses where just absolutely no life can prosper anymore. So now, with all the pieces of the Ark in his possession, except for one, Thermer's ambitions were kind of close to being realized. He had 6 pieces of the Ark, which was a very big deal. However, the Ark in the Queen's Garden wouldn't be easy for them to get. The Sylvain, they are one of the original great races of the world. the Lazineth are no longer of this world. They're in Elgacia, and the Hal, they're extinct. Yeah, sounds familiar. 6 out of 7, right? You guys also have 6 out of 7 pieces of the Ark, or is it you who has 6 out of 7 pieces of the Ark, or is it Beatrice who currently has 6 out of 7 pieces of the Ark? Ruled by the two queens, Inanna and Azena, Rohendel was inhabited by one of the 3 races created by the gods, the Sylvains, endowed with magic prowess, blessed by the god of wisdom Crater. The sisters, who were 2 of the most prominent sorceresses in history, they have level 10 gems and plus 25 weapons, sacrificed themselves actually long ago when Rohendel was in danger of its magic core collapsing in the region of Zanila. If you open up your map and go to Rohendel and go to the bottom left, you'll find that there's a place called the Zanila Ruins. That is a place where the magic core had almost blew up over 500 years ago, and the queen had sacrificed herself in order to prevent Rohendel from completely detonating. So the body of the younger sister Inanna was completely destroyed by this incident, but Elzoin, a very powerful sorceress, yes, male sorcerer, the gender unlock that many people are waiting for, he was so powerful that he imbued Inanna's soul within the body of Azena, and now they were a 2-in-1 package. And now they have 2 personalities coexisting in one body. The twin sisters, they gained immortality from Elzoin, and they ruled Rohendel as a immortal figure. Thermer III was no fool and knew that if he waged war against Rohendel, that they would be destroyed, because the Sylvains, they're just that powerful. At this time, the Dawn Priests came up with a new plan. They would use the relation that Domek had with Queen Azena. Domek was the giant that they brutally murdered. And Domek had a very good relation with the Sylvain. He was like, hey, how y'all doing today? And then the Sylvains would be like, oh, how you doing today, Domek? And then they would pass on and be on their merry way. So they had a very good, friendly relation with one another. And so what they did was Thermer III sent an ambassador to Rohendel, delivering the heart of Domek, who he had claimed died near the soils of Sacria. And Azena welcomed the ambassadors into Rohendel on a favor of goodwill and allowed them to stay in the Queen's garden for a few days until the ceremony that they would have to honor their old, now deceased friend could be held. And on the day of the ceremony, the Dawn Priests, they infiltrated the Queen's garden to steal the final piece of the Ark. And while they did manage to steal it, a new problem arose where there were Sylvain that had caught them. They're not very good spies. They're priests, not rogues. And they ended up murdering 7 Sylvain who had discovered their plan. And no one knew that the aftermath that this would eventually cause. So Azena, she would discover Thermer III's plot. They weren't particularly sneaky about this. And she would also discover that the same people who delivered the heart of her old friend were the same people that absolutely massacred him in the most brutal way fashionable. And she was completely blinded by emotion and immediately declared war on Sacria. In this war, the giants, obviously, one of their kind were murdered by Sacria, as well as the Umar, as another race created alongside the giants, and the spirits, all sided with Rohendel in this war. Meanwhile, Sacria demanded the kings of all human continents who followed the Archbishop would participate in the war against Rohendel. And while they managed to get, forces like Rethramis and whatnot under their control, Shoeshire initially remained neutral. But then Thermer went over to the leader of Shoeshire and was like, hey, I know you guys are kind of poor and your entire country operates on slave trade in order to get by, and you guys are cold and you have no food and you got nothing. If you guys join us in this war, we will give you a fire that could never be extinguished. And he made this promise because he was on the cusp of creating, piecing together the Primal Arc, which could actually fulfill that. And so Shoeshire, they were completely desperate for this because this is something that could potentially help their continent prosper. They went for it. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, Shoeshire was not always a frozen continent. It was actually a continent that used to be as prosperous as Rohendel. How can that be in a continent far to the north, which should naturally be colder? I don't know, but this is a fantasy game, so just bear with me here. But in the past, during the war against Zosma, Sirius, who was the god of ice, would freeze the entire land of Shoeshire in an effort to completely wipe out all the demons in one go that were invading in that area. He didn't really think of the repercussions that would follow suit after that. And because the god of ice's powers were so strong, the frozen land would never thaw. And for this reason, to the suffering denizens of Shoeshire, the allure of an eternal flame, it couldn't be resisted. Yeah, basically Elsa from Frozen. And basically, yeah, fuck the civilian. So, with Shoeshire's decision to join the war, Sacria built up an allied force that could stand up against the might of Rohendel. And without delay, they began their invasion of the magic capital of Arkesia. And this would be the beginning of an empty and tragic war that was called the Fountaincool War. And the Fountaincool was a fruit that was kind of grown from a tree that only grew in Punica and Remeria. And it had a hollow center. It was basically a coconut. We can just call it a coconut. So this would eventually be called the Coconut War because it was a very hollow war that didn't really yield any results. Yeah, I guess it's called hollow fruit in English. Yeah, the hollow fruit. It was called the Hollow Fruit War, but I like Coconut War, so I'm gonna call it Coconut War. Actually, no, I should call it the Hollow Fruit War. Yeah, no one gained anything from it. It was a very hollow war. So Sacria moved a mighty and enormous war force, but the powerful Sylvain's race's magic far exceeded their expectation. And under the command of the queen, who stood at the forefront of Rohendel's army, the allied forces of Sacria were destroyed in mere moments. It wasn't even a fight. Raining fire poured over the scorched earth, followed by a massive tsunami and a terrible gray storm, and they got absolutely rolled. They got rolled. Therma III underestimated the power of the Sylvain. The Sylvain were able to push back a massive army with only the power of a few elite magic soldiers. Not to mention the power of the giants, Umar, and spirits, who were all tremendously powerful in their own accord. Sacria was pressed, and Therma III, desperate not to surrender, considered unlocking the power of the Ark to turn the tides of the war. But his plan would fail. Yes, Orko-P. The war in Arkesia attracted more races and powers of interest over time. The continent became scarred, and enraged seas swallowed islands whole, and maybe if it weren't for this, there would be more islands to get mats from, and you wouldn't get bottlenecked by mats and then complain on the forums. But thanks to these guys, the seas rose a few feet, and now there's less islands in the game's world. The earth itself seemed to be crying at the desolation of all things, and lava erupted from Curzon again. And finally, Arkesia, which was now covered in flames and ashes, pretty much just looked like Petrania. Arkesia, the star of life created by Regulus, was once again on the verge of destruction caused by a war. As Arcasia's life was endangered by the prolonged Hollow Fruit War, the Guardians of Light and Chaos, the ones born to prevent the first rift, had awoken. They finally woke up from their slumber. The first to open their eyes was the progenitor Vergris, the leader of all the Guardians, and following Vergris, the rest of the Guardians began to awaken one by one. Their goal was clear. It was to punish those who threatened Arkesia, the Star of Life. Though they were created to battle gods and demons, this goal of protecting Arkesia meant that even the mortal races would become the enemies of the Guardians. Thus, the Hollow Fruit War entered a new phase, and Vergris he would fly over to Ramassoa, which is Sacria's capital, and straight up just killed Therma III and took the Ark from the Temple of Regulus. Yeah, he just straight up murdered him right there. Vergris took the Ark to a nest southeast of the Rethramis continent, you know where that is, so that humans could no longer wield its power. Acria, who lost Therma III, was not the only one who had lost the leader to the onslaught of the Guardians. Rohendel had lost the great sorcerer Elzoin as well, who they end up just storing his soul in a tree somewhere. That's actually the tree that you see at the end of the Palace of Dreams dungeon. Rohendel had no choice but to put an end to the Hollow Fruit War, but this was only the prelude of something much more worse and sinister, as the Hollow Fruit War and the actions of the Guardians began to form a new dimensional rift in Arkesia, between Arkesia and Petrania. Acria and Rohendel ended the Hollow Fruit War, but this was not enough to stop the Guardians. They were pissed. The Guardians, they don't care about human life in any way, shape, or form. They were created by Regulus. Regulus also doesn't really care about human life at all. He only cares that his nice little star Arkesia is pretty and not dead. And so after the end of the Mortal War, Vergris didn't really know what to do with humanity. So most of the Guardians were driven by their instinct to protect Arkesia, but there were two Guardians underneath his command that were different. The Guardian Balkan, not Vulcan, Balkan, and Guardian Luen, that card that you hate pulling out from your card packs. They were the only Guardians created by Vergris that could act on their own free will, and were Guardians that also possessed the wisdom to speak the human languages. Vergris, Balkan, and Luen debated with one another what to do. Guardian Luen believed in humanity, and he insisted that the Guardians return to sleep now that the war was over. But Balkan, he was like, if we want to purify Arkesia, we need to get rid of all these greedy races that endangered it in the first place. And Vergris, he would eventually side with Luen. He would be like, okay, we'll give them another chance, because Balkan, that sounds kind of fucked up, dude. You should really see a therapist or something. Balkan was not reluctant to believe in the word of the leader of the Guardians and summon the rest of the Guardians to gather and prepare for slumber once more. He was like, I'm not gonna mess with you. I saw what you did to that human dude. But then a new problem emerged. One of the Guardians, by the name of Behemoth, which is one of the Guardians that directly served underneath Balkan, was killed by a human, which had never happened before. A human had never killed a Guardian before. The enraged Balkan ignored Vergris' plea to calm down, and he sought revenge, and he searched for the one known as the Guardian Slayer. Balkan tried to destroy the mortal with his flames, but the human effortlessly purged those flames, and a fight ensued between them that lasted over 10 days. And the earth's crust shifted, dark clouds hanging over the sky, and more cracks would appear in the world to connect Petrania to Arkesia. Balkan was pissed. He didn't even care that he was causing a new problem. And so Balkan and the Guardian Slayer, no longer blinded by their bout, kind of ended their fight when they saw demons pouring in, raining from the sky. And feeling an overwhelming crisis, Balkan asked the name of the man which he fought with before returning to Vergris, and his name was Karan. As if talking to himself, the man recited his name and then vanished without a trace. He literally turned around and walked away slowly after fighting for 10 days without pause. So, this would be the onset of the Chain War, a name which represented the terrible unending war, not unlike a chain link. When the dimensional rift opened, the demons of the Dark Legion poured out. The Dark Legion commander Thamine led them with frightening efficiency to destroy all of Arkesia. Azeros, leaving Petrania and entering Omnium's universe for the first time, looked to the sky to witness the sun. The infinite power that he sought was finally there, right in front of him. Arriving in the eastern part of the continent of Rethramis, Azeros united his army and began his invasion of the world. Humans pray to their gods, but as you know, all the gods peaced. They weren't having any of this. They were like, figure it out for yourselves. All cried out in search of a divine presence which would save them, but there was no response from the heavens and no gods appeared. When all hope turned gray and the shadow of destruction was looming on the continent of Rethramis, the guardian known as Disaster unexpectedly appeared to clash with the demon army. Vergris confronted Kazaros himself, and Balkan faced off with the Dark Soldier Thamine. Yes, Balkan, the one that fought with Kadan, he would stand toe-to-toe with Thamine. While the battle between demons and guardians lasted for a long time and seemed like a close fight, Kazaros still had an ace up his sleeve. The gods of darkness. These are not the Legion commanders, but they are the original direct servants of Zosma. As day turned to night, 2 moons rose in the sky of Arkesia. The red moon, created once more now in Arkesia by the gods of darkness, imbued the demonic army with bloodthirsty power. The demons gathered in the plains under Mount Zagoras, and they just became crazy violent and just too strong at this point. And the red moon itself made Kazaros' flames even stronger, and they were all just stronger demons now, and they pushed all the guardians onto the defensive. Balkan was a guardian whose affinity was naturally closer to the side of chaos. Remember that the guardians, they were created with the power of light and darkness. They were created when the worlds almost collided, and Regulus, with the power of the Ark, worked with Zosma to create them. So naturally, some of these guardians would be closer to the side of chaos, as they were made from Zosma's power. And so Balkan, whose affinity was naturally closer to the side of chaos, he was attracted to Kazaros' demonstrative power and betrayed the Guardians to join Kazaros' forces alongside all of the Guardians that served underneath him. These are the Guardians that you fight. These are the Guardian raids that you fight. These are the Guardians that are naturally to the side of chaos. They are not the Guardians that serve underneath Vergris, but rather the ones that switched sides, the sides of the demons. Thamine, no longer blocked by Balkan, would join Kazaros, and they would 2v1 Vergris. Vergris kind of held out on his own for a little, but he could not stop the power of both of them combined, and he suffered very heavy wounds. Driven by the momentum, the demons seemed within arm's reach of conquering Arkesia. However, in the final moments of despair, the last hope of Arkesia began to shine through the darkness, and a human knight named Luterra appeared on the battlefield. In the final moments of Arkesia, Luterra and 6 others appeared on the battlefield. Led by Luterra was Kadan, Azena, Cien, Galator, Shandy, and Nineveh. Later, these 7 heroes would be known as the Sidereals, a word which means brilliant star, jumping into the fray with weapons and armors forged by the master blacksmith Galator, who is a renowned legendary blacksmith of the Umar race. The guardians of Vergris and the mortal races stood up once more to join their heroes in a final desperate battle for the survival of mankind, and there was no turning back from this point. While the guardians faced off against the gods of darkness, the Sidereals commanded the battle against the Legion commanders. The fiercest battle took place against both the army's strongest leaders, Kadan and Thamine. That was the epicenter of the most powerful clashes. The 2 strongest beings, one from each side, fighting up against each other. The clash of these 2 forces created an enormous cataclysm, which really just prevented any external force from intervening in their fight. Basically, they just kind of stood there and stared at each other and made grunting noises at each other for like the entire fight. Queen Azena, who had annihilated many of the demons, found herself confronted by the Phantom Legion commander Belshazzar. The powerful magic of both the sorceresses destroyed the land around them, turning all caught in the explosions into ashes. Belshazzar, she was calm and stoic, calculative and cold, while Azena was passionate and angry, and seeing the 2 of them, it was really hard to tell which one of them was the devil between the 2. Honestly, chat wouldn't really care. As long as the two of them are fighting, they're basically watching pay-per-view. Luterra joined Vergris in the battle against Kazaros, but even together, the two were no match for the Lord of the Abyss. The sword of the king, the most powerful weapon Galator had forged, was destroyed by Kazaros, shattered in two. And Kadan, seeing his allies in danger, tried to help, but was blocked by Thamine. Vergris spoke to Luterra, telling him to leave the battlefield. Vergris had communicated with the Arc Carrier Garden, known as Mystic, to bring forth the 7 fragments of the Ark to them, which was currently being held in Vergris' nest. Mystic, who had the power to transform into fog, escaped the conflict and retrieved the fragments of the Ark, while the Siderials fought off the Legion commanders. Kind of weird when you think about it, because Mystic was one of the Abyss raids. It was actually the very first Abyss raid that was ever created, before even Keister. It was the first endgame encounter of Lost Ark that wasn't a Guardian raid. And Mystic's fight was really something else. But thinking back on it now, Mystic was a Guardian of Light, and yet we kind of killed its ass. The battle between Galator and the Demon Beast commander Vultan was also fierce. However, Galator's stamina was depleting from the long battle. Luterra, who had ran from the battle against Kazaros at Vergris' order, saw Galator was on the verge of defeat and intervened in the battle with the broken Sword of Kings to face off of Vultan. This is why, when Thirain first interacts with Vultan, Vultan immediately recognizes the sword.
You okay?
Carmine, you dare summon me to a petty mortal squabble? Wait, that sword. You are Luterra kin. Finally, a chance to repay the insult your ancestor inflicted upon me. This, the Keeper of Vanquisher, and where is its light? The sword is as dull and lifeless as you are, boy. The bloodline is thinned. There is nothing of Luterra in you.
A king must control his anger. A king must rule his subjects with kindness. A king must believe in himself.
That light. Yes, I've been waiting for this. Now for a proper battle to the death. Carmine, what is the meaning of this?
I am only doing as instructed. These are orders from Kazaros.
But my revenge! I will not let you get away with this, Carmine!
Is this just some game to you, demon? Yes, but not one I feel like playing today. But don't worry. I'll set up a proper board for us soon enough. Best of luck with your true opponent. And try not to break any pieces. Vanquisher's light. It's time to put an end to this. Luterra Castle. I'm coming.
The true power of the King's Sword is amplified by the will of the wielder, and Galator also called this weapon the Sword of the Fighting Spirit. Luterra, with an unyielding will to protect those around him, reforged the broken blade with this power and blasted away Vultan, leaving a tremendous scar on the demon's body. But it wasn't just Galator suffering the fatigue of battle. Nineveh, who faced off against Vicus, Shandy, who was dealing with the menacing Kekul Sedan, and Cian, who did not retreat against the Lord of Corruption. Things maintained, but as the battle raged on, the side of light once again found themselves on the verge of peril. Even Vergris, the one leading the charge on the side of light, was unable to carry on from the devastating wounds left by Kazaros. And just before all fell to despair, it was the Guardian Mystic who returned with the pieces of the Ark and restored hope. The Guardian Mystic delivered the 7 Ark fragments that Vergris had hidden to King Luterra, and Luterra unleashed the power of the original light and wielded it as a weapon against Kazaros. I have no idea what that looks like. It's basically the Infinity Stones, but we can't say that because of copyright issues. The Sidereals, also empowered by the Ark, began to push back against the demon forces. The demons that fought them suddenly felt the tide turning, and it was overwhelming, and the Sidereals, now backed by the Guardians, began to seal Kazaros with the power of the Ark. The light of the Ark divided into several branches and turned into huge sacred pillars that descended into the ground like spears. And then these pillars would create an expanding barrier that would just disintegrate all the demons. It's like a big explosion, but it only affects demons, I guess. And at the same time, the same barrier began to imprison Kazaros himself. As Kazaros' body began to be sealed by the long chains of Regulus generated by the original light, the Chaos Gate, which served as a bridge between Arkesia and Petrania, also began to close. Unable to stop his fate, Kazaros was like, okay, I lose. So he separates his soul from his body. Very convenient he can do that, by the way. And escaped back into Petrania, leaving his body behind and his commanders left with him, along with the gods of darkness. The Sidereals succeeded in sealing his body and repelling the demon forces from Arkesia, and afterwards the Sidereals decided to confine the sealed body of Kazaros inside Mount Antares, where no one could reach it. So if you look at Arthetine and you look to the right where Curzon is, within Curzon is Mount Antares, and inside that volcano is the original body of Kazaros, which he really wants back, by the way. It's on loan. I'll have to pay late fees if you can't get it back. Finally, the red moon began to wane in Arkesia as the last of the Chaos Gates were finally closing. In the aftermath, the light of the 7 Ark fragments faded and they fell to the ground. Luterra handed out the vessels to each one of the 7 Sidereals and suggested that each of them hide a fragment somewhere around the world so that only those who pass a great ordeal in finding them during a time of great peril can use their power once more. It was to ensure that those stained by greed, like Therma III's bloodline, would never be able to access their power. The members of the Sidereals all agreed to King Luterra's plan, and the Ark fragments were scattered after the Chain War. However, despite the Chain War coming to an end, this was pretty much just the first encounter with the Lord of the Abyss, Kazaros. And even in the boiling lava of Curzon, Kazaros' body wasn't destroyed. And his soul, which returned to Petrania, was already awaiting the day where the seal would be released from his body. After the Chain War, Arkesia kind of faced many changes. The Guardians were divided into those who followed Vergris and those who followed Balkan the Traitor that escaped with the demons into Petrania. Vergris disappeared somewhere unknown in accordance to the Guardians' fate, leaving words that it was humanity's responsibility to restore the destroyed world. He just didn't care. Accordingly, the Guardians who followed Vergris also entered slumber, though one exception was Guardian Luen, who said that if I go to sleep, then adventurers cannot pull my cards from legendary card packs, so I'd like to stay awake. Vergris respected his wishes to be an asshole and let him do so. Humanity would go on to record that Guardians who saved them against the demons as relics of God rather than disasters that nearly ended them. They praised the 7 heroes as Sidereals to commemorate their deeds. Each race began to rebuild the continents, and in the process, new countries began to be established. After the events of the Chain War, Sidereal Cien departed east of Arkesia with his followers, and after a long journey, they discovered a beautiful and rich land with cherry blossoms in full bloom. However, they also discovered the resting body of Guardian Luen, who was recovering from the events of the Chain War. Sidereal Cien confronted Guardian Luen, requesting permission for him and his followers to kind of chill there. And at first, Guardian Luen was fearful that his body, that had been contaminated by the demonic powers of Petrania during the war, would bring harm to them, so he requested that they just leave. Xian was persistent though, and repeatedly made visits to Guardian Luen until he eventually relented, and Guardian Luen permitted them to settle in the land of abundance, provided that Xian personally reviewed any who would enter the ministry overseeing the land. Xian accepted, and the people who settled what would become later known as Anika developed their own unique culture of their own. Guardian Luen, who suffered from the Devil's Wound during the Chain War, though, endured the tempting darkness. He would begin to recover, and Xian helped him. He would help regulate the dark forces within Luen. But one day, he momentarily falters, and it lets the darkness kind of take over Luen for a moment, and Xian was kind of put in this really bad situation. So this darkness erupts from his festering wound, escapes out throughout Anika, and it would attract demons from other areas, and there would be bloodshed. But Xian would, with the help of his allies, the Mutagus, a very fierce band of martial artists who, if you've met during your time in Anika, if you didn't skip Anika entirely, would go on to battle these demons for the next several months, eventually eradicating them all. And peace would return to Anika. However, due to Guardian Luen's instability, he would leave the oversight of Anika to the Mutagus and would retreat to the Valley of Mirrors, where he resides today. Over the next 400 years, Anika would continue to develop its culture and trade based on the natural environment and abundant resources. So, the events of the Chain War, it had a pretty resounding impact beyond the destroyed civilizations. Sometime after the war had ended, a new race of humans emerged, exhibiting some of the dark power of the demons. When you have demons like the first boss in Vicus's raid, of course, there are some girls that are going to be hot and bothered and going to want to mate with them. And the same thing with demons like Vicus. So humans started appearing that seemed to have powers of demons despite having a human-like appearance. The races of Arkesia, whose fear of demons still remained long afterwards, showed immense hostility to these people. The greatest resentment came from that of the Archbishop state of Sacria, which still technically existed, even if it didn't have its leader. There are several theories surrounding the appearance of the Delane, but it is ultimately agreed upon that they came to be due to the remnants of the Red Moon that had torn asunder in the previous war and affected some of the people. Or my theory from before. Both are possible. Sacria would carry out the genocide of Delane under the name of God's will, claiming that the seeds of the demon race have to be expelled from Arkesia. No demon cummies. Despite the Delane showing no ill will towards others, they were harshly discriminated against for their appearance. Other countries bore witness to this genocide, to those who did not fight back, but instead would retreat into hiding and forced to wander to avoid the wrath of the Holy Empire. The name Delane was taken from a dialect meaning forsaken. They would make their way to the cursed land of Phaeton, where they could find recluse. Phaeton, an abandoned land where only the scars of the Chain War remained, as you could tell, it basically just looks like Philadelphia. The Delane settled down there, making do with the limited resources of the starved land. Regardless if they were alive or not, there were little options for them moving forward. Many saw only self-destruction or death by the Holy Crusade. Some, however, would take to training and try to master the demonic energy prevalent within them. In a matter of life or death, it was all that they really felt that they could do. And after hundreds of years of trial and error, some had managed to repress the demonic energy and give the appearance of being an ordinary human. If they faltered for even a moment, they would look like a cockroach. Those of strong faith believed that God had willed this power to them for a reason. Not all Delane were reasonable, though. Some cursed Sacria, who had driven them to the edge of the world, and these Delane did not attempt to subdue the devil's temptation. These renegade Delane would often clash with those who tried the diplomatic approach, and the fracture between ideologies continuously grew until the Delane eventually divided into two separate factions. The rogue Delane awaited the resurrection of Kazaros, but not with the intent to ally with him. They firmly believed that if they could kill Kazaros, the culprit behind their fate, with their own hands, that they would achieve salvation and achieve true God's will. During the Chain War, the leader of the Phantom Legion, who was searching for the magic power of the Sylvains, infiltrated Rohendel through a gap in their surveillance. In order to weaken the might of the Sylvains, the leader of the Phantom Legion, they infiltrated Zanila's Sylvains, who served Queen Azena. Belshazzar then began to manipulate these Sylvains with the temptation of power, and the enchanted Sylvain activated an enormous magical explosion within the city, decimating it entirely, leaving only ruin, which is the area that you can visit today in games, Zanila's Ruin. After the Chain War had ended, Zanila's Sylvains had awoken from the disillusionment and sought forgiveness from the Queen, only to be expelled to an unknown land. Remember, this is the same explosion that killed Banana, so Azena was not particularly keen on the idea of forgiving them. The Queen made this decision due to becoming aware that her people had gained a new fear for the magic that had been wielded by Zanila's Sylvain and would reject them. They attempted to reintegrate the society. And then Inanna, aware of the will of her counterpart, quietly assisted their migration. Rohendel would rule peacefully for a great period, remaining pretty much one of the most powerful regions in the world today. In game, they're still considered probably the most powerful nation. And then Azena would name the land where the departed Zanila Sylvain would settle as Vern. And that's where we arrive with North Vern. After making the journey to Vern, the Zanila would install Eowyn, their leader, as their queen. Eowyn made the decision to allow races of all kinds to reside in Vern, including the likes of orcs, trolls, and goblins. It became the melting pot of the world, the center of Arkesia, both proverbially and literally. It is the center of the game's world map. Even today, harmony with those three races has not fully been achieved, but Eowyn did not forget the teachings of Zanila, which emphasized harmony, creation, and development. This was the ideology that founded Vern and would be what would allow Vern to establish itself. After the Chain War, Sacria's machinations began moving once again, developing civilization under the new Archbishop's regime. Archbishop Darius, blinded by the power of the Ark, excommunicated the Thermer family, just got rid of them altogether, who were the cause of the Hollowfruit War. Additionally, they dismantled the army of Paladins, who had served as the sword and shield of Sacria originally. This radical reform did have an impact on the Dawn Priests and scholars who studied medicine, magic, and science in the Ivory Tower, and who had for many years been vigilant defenders of Sacria. Darius lashed at their diligence, stating that their study was contrary to the will of Regulus. Darius, very religious man, he don't believe in no science, Kekona. He labeled the Ivory Tower as a symbol of heresy and began to oppress it, the place where they would study all these different things, scientific approaches and innovations. However, the scholars did not kneel before Darius and instead escaped the continent, and these scholars would eventually discover the Red Desert while exploring the world in search of pretty much a good environment where they could complete their research. And they found a barren desert where nothing rose. However, Kenai would discover that this land, in fact, called Totrich, had oil underneath it. So Totrich was established as the capital temporarily. Totrich is one of the little areas that you could visit now, but they would eventually establish the city of Stern as the new capital of Arthedain. However, the path of developing the country on the barren wasteland was not a smooth one. The people of Arthedain, who explored all means of science, looked to the machines and robots as substitutes for human body. They were like, oh, I got a small pee-pee. Oh, now I got a big robot pee-pee. Everything okay now. The physical experiments, which started with replacing bones from the human skeleton, eventually reached the point of changing the nature of the species and would result in a new race whose blood flows blue rather than red from God. This new race of cyborgs classified themselves as a new race called the Psychons, and from there, the metropolis city of Stern would soon be established. The capital would be moved from Totrich to Stern in the pursuit of even greater scientific endeavors. The light of the Ark was dispersed at the end of the Chain War. The residual remains of the Ark were scattered all throughout Arkesia. These tiny minerals left behind by the Ark would be known as Acrasium. In addition, fragments of chaos were also scattered throughout the world after the Red Moon had collapsed. Those fragments of chaos are the ones that you use to activate your awakening skills. So if you're ever wondering why you have to spend 250 silver every time you use your awakening, it's because of Kazaros. And then Acrasium is the material that was used to create powerful weapons and armor throughout the game world. With the discovery of Acrasium, mankind made leaps and bounds forward in technology. In the early days of its discovery, it was used to reinforce and strengthen weapons and armors of warriors, but after the development of technology, it was used for other purposes, such as the furnace in Yorn and the Blitz transportation system in Arthetine, that crazy monorail that Elon Musk made. So, Acrasium, unfortunately, you don't really use that much. You don't really use it nowadays in Lost Ark, but back in Season 1 of Lost Ark, that was how you upgraded your items. You used the material called Acrasium, which would drop from things like Chaos Gate, from fishing shit up out of the sea, from your dailies. There were many sources of Acrasium from the cash shop. You use it's just politics. You spend that money, you get that Acrasium. Okay. However, the value of Acrasium, which was a finite resource, sharply rose over time, and eventually, as the increased demand for it occurred with more weapons and armors needing it for the preparation of different wars and battles, items that were worked on by Acrasium became an exceedingly rare commodity. It became a luxury only for a special class of warriors. It sharply divided the power gap between those who had a credit card and those who did not, and even shifted the power between continents. Yorn was the region that held the greatest amount of Acrasium. They would accumulate great wealth through the trade of resource between Rohendel and Vern, who would purchase Acrasium in large quantities, processing them into weapons and armors as valuable trade goods to neighboring countries. While Acrasium became the most important material in all of Arkesia, the Fragments of Chaos were lesser known and even harder to find. It is said that the fragments are small but possess the energy of the original Chaos and can drive one who possesses the fragment to madness. And this is an important bit of lore because when you get your Legion, Raid, Relic sets, you can increase the quality of these items using Fragments of Chaos. And the chance of successfully increasing the quality is totally RNG. And when you succeed, the amount it increases by is anywhere between 0 and 100, heavily weighted towards 0. So much like the lore implies, it will drive you to madness and also completely brokenness by increasing your item's quality with Fragments of Chaos. So be mindful. After sealing the great evil Kazaros, Sidereal Luterra announced the end of the war upon the plain of the final battle. Luterra would later return to this country to lead it in prosperity. He would sign a treaty of friendship with the federal states of Rethramis and establish peaceful relations with the younger countries of Vern and Arthetine. During the Chain War, King Luterra, who united several races under the banner of the Sidereals, had an everlasting impact on the world. Even after his eventual death, the country of Luterra faced an era of glory for 400 more years. This man was the definition of a gigachad, and Thyrane's got some big shoes to fill. Luterra, known as the Country of Knights, had long been respected by the other countries as a powerhouse in the world, but the situation in recent years had become shaky due to the situation of the rightful ruler. Remember, this is lore before the start of the game. The wealthy nobles would threaten the king's authority, and at the center of this conflict was the king and the Easter regent. What is his name? Sherrit? Sherry? Thyrane's uncle, siblings of one another. Dissatisfied by his weaker brothers ascending to the throne, Sherrit poisons King Lionel, that was his brother, who's dead before the start of the game, and takes the place of Lionel's son Thyrane as the regent. Afterwards, Thyrane, who had become a young adult, flees the capital due to being able to improve his qualifications as a king, and he would later form a counterforce with the nobles who believed in him and would raise a coup against his uncle. Yeah, Lionel. Remember, this is 400 years later, so King Luterra has come and passed, and many bloodlines have passed since then. So there was Lionel, there was Lionel's brother Sherrit. Sherrit poisons him, And then before letting Lionel ascend to the throne, he's like, "This kid can't be the ruler. I'm the ruler." After the Chain War, the nations of Arkesia would develop at an unparalleled speed and begin to heal the wounds of the war. Under the new Archbishop Darius, Sacria restored its authority as a land of religion and center of the world. Though really that's Vern. Art developed in what is it called? Is it called Plates? Let me. Oh, I can't see easily. It's the little land that's above Tortwake. I can't remember its name. Where beautiful music resonates. And Punica, the country of women, fruit continued to bloom, and the people lived in endless festivals. Oh, Placia? I don't know how to pronounce that. The Umar accumulated wealth by making weapons and armors from Acrasium, and the races of Arkesia who continue to flourish were headed for a more prosperous era than ever known before. And after 500 years of long peace, the people of the world just began to forget about the war about the demons, which would slowly slip into the realm of folktale along with the existence of the Ark. People thought of the Ark as nothing more than a fairy tale, and the existence of the Ark, the original power, slipped from the memories of everyone. However, over the years, the chains of Regulus that sealed away Khazros' body began to loosen little by little. His body, which began to resonate with the soul of Petrania, would begin to tear large and small chaos gates throughout Arkesia, slowly but surely. However, because humanity had become careless due to the long peace, they were not aware of the coming disaster. Karazhan's volcano, where Khazros' body was sealed, had begun to erupt once more, weakening the binds of the chain. And then one evening at dusk, in a certain place, a mysterious bard would sing tales of the past, and people who heard the story kind of mocked the old man. They were like, "Yeah, right, haha." But he got up and said he didn't care. Are there really that many legends in the world that you cannot believe, like the power that defeated the old demons, the power of the Ark? And thus begins your story in Lost Ark. And the game opens up in Trixion, where a Lazanet by the name of Beatrice tells you that your appearance is foretold by a great prophecy. He goes on to tell you that demons are beginning to make their move to invade Arkesia once more, and only the power of the Primordial Arc can stop them. And you, who picked a character and made it, you all have your own origin story, which they removed in lieu of the unified prologue, but which you can still view. Each character found their way there.
The light of destiny first led you to the holy land of Rethramis. There, you met a friendly priest named Armin, who also sought the Ark. This priest of the light had a secret. He was a Delane, a half-human, half-demon hybrid. Despite the darkness inside him, all Father Armin desired was to save the world. The two of you hunted down clues to the Ark across the continent, from the salt desert of Eudia to the war-torn nation of Luterra. There, you discovered the people of Luterra were suffering under the rule of the cruel regent, Sherrit.
Oh, that's how you pronounce his name.
Sherrit was in league with the demons, working with the treacherous Carmine and the demon beast commander, Valtan. You and Armin helped Prince Thirain, the rightful heir to the throne, take back his kingdom at the Battle of the Glorious Wall.
And that's kind of like the quick recap version of the events leading up until you reclaim Luterra. We can go into it a little bit more. So Beatrice, she basically tasks you with the mission to retrieve the pieces of the Ark, and says that you kind of have to start by looking for the people that remember it at all. And so you set sail for Trua, and you find this temple, and it reveals itself to you. And it has this magic scroll in it, and it identifies you as the Seeker, the one destined to strike down the demons. You make your way over to a nearby town called Prideholm, where you meet Armin, and you kind of rescue him from a gang of thugs. And you head over to Prideholm, where you meet the head priest, and he knows right away that you are the Seeker. And you're looking for the Lost Ark. And he gives you a mission to go find this slab, which is conveniently missing and has all the information about the location of the Ark. And you are on your way to find the piece of the slab, and you yourself, as the character, find these different clues which talk about the previous chain war. And eventually you find the missing piece of the slab, which had been stolen by mercenaries, but before you could take it, the piece of the slab is surrendered to Carmine, a devious sorcerer who had previously been in contact with you during your mission in Trua, though back then he was disguised as a kind-hearted priest with red hair. Before you can confront Carmine, he leaves for Prideholm to piece together the slab, as he's also seeking the Ark. You defeat the mercenary, and you leave for Prideholm, and you find it besieged by demons, and as you confront Carmine in the cathedral, Armin intervenes and is able to stave off Carmine by tapping into his delaying powers. Armin now reveals himself as a half-demon and dismissively tells you about his kind is empowered by the Red Moon, the creation of Kazaros, a mortal enemy to mankind. He rejects this power as much as he can. The slab reveals that the Ark was split into 7 fragments by the Guardians to prevent mankind from being able to abuse its power. As we already knew, Therma III tried to do that. He's also foretold that the Seeker would eventually bring the pieces of the Ark together, that's you, to stave off the darkness once more. Making your way east, you enter the Morai Ruins with Armin to find the Sword Seal, an essential key to finding one of the 7 pieces of the Ark. Carmine once again intervenes, and Armin crashes through the wall, Miley Cyrus style, and is forced to transform into a demon once again in order to fend him off. Leaving you with the opportunity to take the Sword Seal, you're able to find Armin again after his battle with Carmine, wounded, and you continue to make your way east in search of the Ark, where you meet Thyrain, the rightful heir of Luterra. Thyrain leads a rebel nation against his uncle Sherry, who had usurped the throne and is conspiring with Carmine and the demons. On the way, your forces are ambushed by Vultan, one of the 6 Legion commanders, and Thyrain is able to momentarily unlock the power of his father's sword, Vanquisher, to repel the Vultan. Before the fight can continue, Carmine teleports Vultan away, saying that this is an order from Kazaros himself. The fight would continue after you make your way to Luterra's throne room, defeating Thyrain's uncle and confronting Carmine once again, who calls out on Vultan to finish the fight that he started. The combined forces of you and Thyrain, though, are able to weaken Vultan, who Carmine then betrays and absorbs, killing him and taking his power. Carmine, satisfied, then leaves. The siege of Luterra has ended, successful but bittersweet due to the high death toll. Thyrain, named king, promises the people a new beginning. After recovering from the aftermath, Luterra is in good shape, and Thyrain names you a knight. Also gives you an island where you can put your harem. Meanwhile, Armin discovers the Seal of Wisdom, the other half needed to find the piece of the Ark. He just found it conveniently in the throne room. You had to fight a demon named Thanatos for the other one, so it's very convenient that he just kind of found it. Your journey brings you to meet a poet named Allegro, who informs you that the information on the Ark is supposed to be passed down from ruler to ruler, but given the circumstance with King Thyrain and how he was betrayed by his uncle, the tradition had been disrupted. Making your way through Lastra Forest, you use the 2 seals to unlock the tomb of the late King Luterra. In a spark of a vision, Luterra tells you that you are the last hope for mankind and entrusts the first piece of the Ark to you, which you then conveniently deliver to Beatrice in Trixion, thanks to Allegro, who reveals himself as one of the Lazanith, who had his wings clipped after his kind betrayed Regulus when they stole their god's Ark in order to fight the Hal. He teaches you the song, which lets you travel freely between Arkesia and Trixion as an envoy of Beatrice. Meeting with Thyrain, he tells you that the other pieces of the Ark are scattered throughout the world and prepares a ship for you. At the same time, Kazaros meets with his generals, who tasks each of them with traveling to a different region to wreak havoc. You rendezvous with Armin at an inn, who is attempting to treat a civilian who's afflicted with a strange plague, which terrorizes their mind and renders them mad. Here in this inn, you also encounter a pair of travelers named Zinnervale and Shandy, who are investigating the plague as well. While looking for the source of the plague, Armin reveals to you the story of the previous Archbishop Therma III, who was blinded by the power of the Ark and thought himself to be a messiah of Arkesia. His covenant, which had almost destroyed the world by inadvertently creating the bridge between Arkesia and Petrania, still exists to this day, as Armin had discovered and is still operating in the belief that they are carrying out the will of Regulus. Infiltrating the Covenant, you discover that the new head priest of their order calls themselves the incarnation of the late Archbishop Thermer and summons the Lord of Madness, Saintone. Armin and Shandy manage to repel Saintone temporarily as he manages to teleport away. Following his trail, you discover that he is planning to attack Boria's domain, and so you travel back to Thyrain to request assistance, which he obliges, along with many other forces from other factions within the domain. Fending off the Legion of Madness, you arrive at the battle between Armin and Saintone, and you're able to successfully defeat him. He flees and meets with Carmine, requesting a portal back to Petrania so he could recover. Carmine, however, betrays him and gives him the suck, in the same way that he did to Vultan, absorbing him and believing to have killed him. However, Saintone is able to leave a piece of his soul within Kakul, the doll that is always accompanying him, escaping death. After the battle with the Madness army, a large faction of Templars arrives in the Borea domain, headed by the leader Executioner Solus. Solus, who had received word that the previous king, Thyrain's uncle, was conspiring with demons. Despite Thyrain defeating his uncle and taking the throne, Solus determines that Thyrain was unable to rout the Madness Plague, inflicting his people, and decides to execute anyone he suspects of being afflicted with the plague. He leads a group of civilians to the Lost Wind Cliff, where he decides to execute them in the name of Regulus despite Armin's pleas. Armin, furious by the slaughter of the people he tried to protect, transforms into his demonized state and kills the entire group of Templars, including Solus himself, just as you and Thyrain arrive at the scene to witness the massacre. Thyrain pleads with Armin, telling him that they can make this right, and that surely he had a reason to do what he did, but Carmine then appears and whisks Armin away, stealing that boy, and they just kind of leave off to Petrania. And that is the end of part 1 of Lost Ark.